Liberal Democrat spokesperson Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Strangford for bringing this debate and allowing us to discuss this incredibly important issue in this House. On the 25th of November 1981, the General Assembly of the United Nations passed Resolution 3655. It said, "Discrimination between human beings on the grounds of religion or belief constitutes an affront to human dignity and a disavowal of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and shall be condemned as a violation of the human rights and fundamental freedoms proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights." Nearly half a century has passed since those words were written, and they came just 7 years after the passage of the Second Amendment to the Constitution of Pakistan. That declared that Ahmadi Muslims were not a Muslim for the purposes of the Constitution or the law. Now, I will concentrate in my speech on the Ahmadi community, but that should not diminish the persecution and the discrimination suffered by other communities, which have been mentioned by many in this chamber. We find ourselves today, so many decades since, still grappling with the critical injustice, prejudice and persecution that the amendment enshrined in law and enabled. That is what the current legal framework in Pakistan has done. It has enabled not just legal exclusion and prosecution, but ongoing hate speech and violent persecution. Extremist clerics in Pakistan have called on Ahmadi Muslims to be hung or beheaded, for their women to be murdered to prevent more Ahmadi Muslims from being born, and even for the government of Pakistan to understand that if they do not act, the people will take matters into their own hands and kill Ahmadi Muslims themselves. And if anyone is in any lingering doubt whether this awful rhetoric extends just to calls for violence within Pakistan's borders, I refer them to the comments at one rally this year, where the following was said: "We have to strangle each and every Ahmadi. You have no idea how powerful this slogan is. You will raise it here, and Ahmadi will die in Great Britain." This abhorrent rhetoric, and it has no place in a democratic republic like Pakistan. And I know from conversations with many of my constituents, as well as Ahmadi Muslims across London, that it absolutely terrifies Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan and here in the UK. Because rhetoric, as we too often forget, has consequences. Violent rhetoric becomes violence as surely night becomes day. And sure enough, violent hate crimes across Pakistan and around the world against Ahmadi Muslims are at shocking levels. This year, 4 Ahmadi Muslims were killed in a targeted manner. Tahir Iqbal, the president of a local Ahmadi Muslim community, was shot dead by 2 motorcyclists. Zaka Oreman, a dentist, was killed in his own clinic by 2 gunmen. In both cases, no perpetrators have been identified and brought to justice. And in Sadalpur, 2 Ahmadi Muslims, Ghulam Sawat and Rahat Ahmad Bajwa, were murdered in separate incidents on the same day. The alleged perpetrator, a 16-year-old student of a madrasa, confessed to the killings, citing religious reasons. 16 years old. I invite honourable members to recall the poisonous rhetoric that I've just outlined as why this young man must have been exposed to in order to carry out such a heinous act. It seems that violence against Ahmadi Muslims is rarely investigated and in many cases is seemingly encouraged or enabled by local officials and policemen in Pakistan. In June, 30 Ahmadi Muslims were arrested for the crime of celebrating Eid. Ahmadi homes were attacked, an Ahmadi mosque was ransacked, and the police stood by and did nothing. In fact, earlier this year in January, it is alleged that local police in the Punjab region, acting under instructions from a local official, themselves took part in another disconcertingly common and awful act of hatred: the desecration of tombs in an Ahmadi Muslim graveyard. Desecration is a particularly cowardly and heinous act and serves only to underscore the severity of the situation facing Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan. Freedom of worship is inextricably linked with freedom of expression and speech, and as a Liberal, I will always place the greatest currency on that most cherished of virtues. But as all liberal societies have found, freedom of speech cannot extend to freedom of hate speech and the freedom to incite violence and hatred. The Pakistani government ought to be reminded of that fact in our bilateral engagements. Madam Deputy Speaker, nobody should have to live like this, to face hatred and threats, violence and death, just for worshipping your own religion in a peaceful manner in a democratic country. It goes against every principle we hold dear in the community of international law. It goes against our every principle as an open, democratic, tolerant nation ourselves, not least as a nation that is bound to Pakistan by a common history, a common language and a track record of collaboration on tackling extremism in the region. We must be a critical partner of Pakistan, and I call on the government to respond to the concerns raised in the House today. Please come forward with reassurances that at every single opportunity, the plight of Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan will be raised with the government of that country, because our conscience calls on us to not turn a blind eye. Ahmadi Muslims deserve, as members of all faiths do, to worship free of intimidation and discrimination. The Liberal Democrats have long been in favour of a rigorous, values-based foreign policy that puts our money where our mouth is. We cannot just talk a good game on protecting minorities around the world and standing up for those fundamental freedoms outlined in the Declaration of Human Rights. We must use our leverage with governments like the one in Pakistan to encourage them to take serious and concrete steps towards making them a reality. It should be an issue that unites us across this House, and I'm encouraged to hear that it does, and one that reminds us not just of our obligations under international law, but our moral duty to those facing oppression everywhere. Thank you.